We are in the main remnant of the ancient village of Arbel. It's the synagogue. The synagogue was probably built in several stages over time. According to the coins found in the area, the village was inhabited here since the Hasmonean period, probably after Judas Aristobulus conquered back this region at the end of the 2nd century BC. And this happens in parallel with the establishment of other Jewish villages in Galilee. However, according to the architecture and details of the building, it seems that the synagogue is from the 4th century AD. In terms of our location, you can see this amazing view. Galilee Sea in front of us, Arbel mountain and caves on the right, and Mount Nitai and its caves on the left. We are hundreds of meters away from the ancient synagogue in Arbel. Look at this olive grove. Impressive amount of olive trees around me, a beautiful sight. So before we return to the synagogue, a few words about the income source of the local at the time, and I refer to the Mishnah and Talmudic period from the 2nd to the 5th century CE. Let's start with olive crops. Just as can be seen today, not much change for the last 2000 years. During the Mishnah and the Talmud, the olive oil production industry was the most important industry in the lower Golan Heights and in the Galilee. Meaning it was a significant source of income, and as evidence are the oil mills discovered in the Galilee from that period. It is important to note that farmland of most villages at that time was few tens of dunams. I would say 20 dunams on average, which is equivalent to 5 acres. So what is the income that a village could generate in that period 2000 years ago? I explained this in details, the economic aspect of producing oil, in the videos referring to my visit to various ancient synagogues in the Golan, but let's do a short exercise just to provide a high-level view. So let's assume that 12 dunams or 3 acres of the village farmland was dedicated for growing olives. Now in each dunam or quarter of an acre, there are say 36 trees that will yield on average 1.2 tons of olives. So 12 dunams or 3 acres will yield 14.4 tons of olives. And in a conversion ratio of 15%, we can produce almost 2.2 tons of oil every year. This yielded an income which was significant to a village in those days. Now, when producing a large amount of oil, you have to make tools to transport it. So no wonder there is evidence of extensive local pottery industry across the Galilee. There are many sources which praise the linen fabric industry in Arbel at that time. It is worth noting that flax was imported from Egypt to Israel thousands of years ago. The cultivation of flax in Israel, which was very profitable at the time, lasted until the Muslim conquest in the 7th century. Then cotton began to penetrate this region, and the cultivation of cotton increased on the expense of growing flax until it disappeared almost completely during the Crusader period. A different and interesting angle about the main types of cloth in biblical times, they were linen and wool, and evidence of them being the main fabrics can be found, for example, in the book of Hosea, chapter 2, verse 7. According to the Bible, it is forbidden to have a cloth structure of both linen and wool. This rule is named shatnez, for example, in Leviticus chapter 19. And as my grandmother used to claim, everything is related somehow to economy. And maybe this limitation is an evidence for an economic battle between the producer of linen, who are the farmers, and the shepherds who produce the wool. And to summarize this item, let's see as part of Moses' last speech in the book of Deuteronomy. Arbela captures much more attention in the Hasmonean period. In the first book of Hasmonean, chapter 9, it tells about Dimitris Soter, who was king of the Seleucid Empire in Syria between 162 and 150 BC. Demetrius sends Bacchides, a Seleucid general, to Judea to suppress the Hasmonean revolt. Bacchides, on his way from Syria to Judea, passes through Arbel, conquers the place and kills many of its population. The governing pendulum continues, and Yehuda Aristobulus of the Hasmonean takes control of Galilee in 103-104 BC. 63 years later, in 40 BC, Herod was appointed by the Romans to rule Judea. But in practice, it took him 3 years to gain control. During the 3 years, Herod fought the inhabitants of Galilee, and among them, those lived in Arbel who opposed his reign and rebelled against him. So let's talk now about the synagogue. The longitude axis is north to south. Structure here has columns forming the shape letter U, and this is a type of basilica originated in Roman architecture, which served as the important public building in the city. Now notice the two pillars at the north. It has a cross section in the shape of heart. This is common design in buildings in the Galilee or in the Golan. The main entrance is from the east. This is quite rare for synagogue from that time in Galilee. But most impressive is that the opening is made entirely of one piece, including the threshold, the mezuzah, and the jump. It is probably that there was a block of rock that was hewn, and the result is exceptionally impressive. See also the circle shapes at the top. This is an amazing entrance. Now, you can also notice the courtyard here just in front of the entrance. It could be that this is what the sages at the time call door before door, that is through a courtyard or an entrance room. The ruins here also contained narrower columns, which probably served the second floor, as can be seen in the illustration. In the Byzantine period, probably towards the end of the 6th century, substantial changes were made to the building, with the two important ones are related one to another, and they are building a south wall, a rounded niche for the ark, also known as the Torah Ark or Aron HaKodesh in Hebrew. And the second thing is adding the Torah reading platform in front of the ark. Another important change is adding an entrance in the northern wall. This is reflecting the concept that the entrance is on the same axis as the direction of prayer. This concept is actually more typical to a later period. The synagogue was probably destroyed by fire in the middle of the 8th century, probably as a result of a strong earthquake that struck Galilee in 749 and was called, in a direct translation from Hebrew, the seventh noise, since it occurred in a sabbatical year. Now, a famous individual from ancient Arbel is Nitai of Arbel, who lived in the 2nd century BC. He was the preceding judge, or another term, vice president of the Sanhedrin, alongside the president of the Sanhedrin, who was at that time Joshua ben Pirchia. Now, what is Sanhedrin? It is a type of Jewish supreme council and court having jurisdiction over religious, civil, and criminal issues. It operated during the Second Temple period, probably until the early 5th century. Nitai and Joshua were the second zugot. Zugot in English means pair. Together they are the second pair of sages in the period called zugot that lasted about 200 years during the Second Temple period in the 1st and 2nd century BC, acting as the spiritual leadership of the people of Israel. We reach the end, and as usual, the trivia question. How many zugot or pairs were there in the zugot period? The answer will appear in 5 seconds.